Yeah. Eventually that's going to be worked out. But it is Friday night, everyone. How did you survive the week? I mean, I'm not even completely 100% sure I survived, but hey. I'm here, and maybe you're here, maybe you're not. If you're here, thanks for being here. If you're not here, well, thank you anyway. Of course, my friends just decided to start streaming at the same time I did, which is entirely normal, so. But we are here. It is Friday night, and it is time for Friday Night Fairy Tales. I have a couple of new animated emotes. Well, they're not really new, but they're animated. And they're for the level 1 subscribers, because that's how Twitch rolls. But they're just, minor animations added to my normal ones. Like the hilarious laughter one. Because, you can only laugh so much before you just start shaking on side. Or for all those people who, come in just to lurk, well, I've got one of those too. Just sliding in to lurk. That kind of made sense. And I thought about doing another one for rating, but the animation goes the wrong direction. It slides in, but not the direction I would expect it to. And for some reason I am short. This is not where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be taller than this. This is where I go. Yeah, right there. Anyway. I got a nice book in the mail, which I have a feeling will be my Christmas reading for this year. Ooh, it is nicely printed. But I will be reading... Ooh, got the kitty cat. Okay. Yeah, Roshnock. But it is a collection of 50 terrifying Yuletide tales. And I'm going to be adding some of these to my Christmas roll. As well as me finding out that the Vincent Price narration of Christmas Carol is public domain, so it will be in my Christmas themes too. Because... well, it's Vincent Price, and how could I pass up him narrating anything? Honestly, if I could only sound like Vincent Price, would I get more people watching me? I mean, if they can get Liam Neeson to narrate the Bible, why can't I read scary Christmas stories? Anyway. Yeah, fairy tales. Fairy tales is why we're here. Fairy tales is what I do, and that's... I've written a little bit more in my book, and I'm still working on book 2, but I will hopefully have them out sometime next year. But something else that's going on. December 19th is my affiliate anniversary. I'll have been making less than minimum wage for Amazon for over a year. Because admittedly, do you know how many hours of recordings that I've done just directly on here? I mean, admittedly, they are all on YouTube too, and YouTube doesn't pay me at all. But I have several... Why am I switching it to Christopher Walken? I don't know. I have several hours of me narrating stories, which is just crazy. And I did mention on the Twitter or X or whatever it is that I have... Oh, yesterday I drank an entire bottle of wine before doing the Sherlock Holmes stories. I will admit to that. It was just Smokin' David, and I did drink the entire bottle like it was juice because, you know, me growing up, I just thought it was juice anyway, so I drank it like that. Well, tonight, it was eggnog with butterscotch moonshine. So, it'll be an interesting night. Let me go ahead and get V-Bridger going here. Okay, V-Bridger says it's working. At least it controls my eyes a little bit better. Well, a little. Oh, my camera's tilted out. That's why. Oh, that's why I was short. My camera was tilted. Normally I'm right here because this is roughly the height given to me by dimensions that I assigned to this wonderful 3D model that I have turned into a 2D picture. Yes, all of this scenery that I have is actually a 3D floor plan print that I took, well, it's from a website called Storyteller. And all the still shots that I use in my scrolling in image and everything else are the still shots taken from that I just pieced in together and made it as an animation. The thing is, I tried to time it out like someone was walking. That's why it goes back and forth. Because I was moving the camera like I was taking steps. But anyway, we're not here for my malarkey. Well, we are, but that's beside the point. We're here for fairy tales tonight. Oh yeah, if you want to buy a book, the red book above me, after the end of the year, I'm just killing that one entirely. And kind of hoping they'll pay me even if the book is closed, because they won't pay out until I hit their $25 threshold, and I'm like $18 short. But I've got like 20 copies of that damn book at home, so I may do signed ones and just say, hey, well, I got the signed ones on eBay. I do have, hold on. Let me post my own links because I am a horrible salesman. Where is it? Okay. Not that Kel won't be cycling through it eventually. What? It's a crab roller. I don't have a crab roller. Pokey Catch Ultra Bolo. Okay. But here's the links that I'm posting now. Boom. But I dropped the personalized copies on eBay down to the same price they are on Amazon. So honestly, the only difference is shipping. And I think shipping through me is like maybe $3 or $4, so it's not that bad, really. I guess I can do internationally if you really want, but I will be writing notes in the books. Or if you want to get it for a gift, by all means, order it for a gift and I will personalize it to whoever that you are giving it to. Because, well, I want people to have my book. If I could just give them out, I would. I'm tempted to just drop them off at one of my favorite local booksellers and say, hey, you want some copies of these? Put whatever price you want on it. Considering how much money I've spent there on books, they could at least do that much. Okay, I caught the crab roller, whatever it is. I'm gonna look. What is a crab roller? Oh, I caught the flying baby the other day. Crab roller is... It's not really a crab. It's more like the mantis shrimp with boxing gloves on. Anyway, the one on the very end, the one that I have listed as the discounted book on Blurb, at $9 a book, which is the cheapest there is. It's the red one above me. That's cheap because it doesn't have the artwork on it. I would have to sell 9 more before they pay me out. But anyway, that is the advertising portion of our show for the night. Thank you, everyone. Now I'm going to... Where am I? Okay. I'm going to go over to the 2D on 2D because I have not rendered this room. I'm just using flat backgrounds. The library. And we are reading from the Red Fairy Book. I would say by Andrew Lang, but he had several people helping him. And he credits them in the book. And he didn't really write any of the stories, he just translated and compiled them. Which is kind of what I'm doing in my As Told by books. So, who is sending me messages? Oh, it's the sirens. They can wait. Yes, I talk to sirens. Who wouldn't? And this is a story that I know I have read, probably within this last year. And hopefully I will pronounce names considerably better this time. Probably not. Oh, I need to fix... I had a glowing book image that I was going to use here. Because originally I was going to have that book open, but why am I not centered again? Get in the middle of the thing. Okay, there we go. Serious streamer here, everyone. Absolutely serious. But anyway, these are the stories I like to have fun with. That is why they're considered as read by as opposed to... So I don't mess up I don't worry as much if I mess up on these because I'm reading these for fun. And since I am recording these for posterity, which means my YouTube channel, I should call it posterity, I have this vast archive of stories I've already read. If you feel like it, go check them out. It is youtube.com/@KentronValgree. And since... Oh, where's my link? Where's my link? Linky. Where is it? The link I'm going to post is actually one that will auto-subscribe you. just in case. Oh, hold on. That is your warning. If you click the link, it will ask if you want to confirm a subscription. And it is this link right here. So, if you want to subscribe to me and get notifications on when I put things on YouTube, by all means, go to the channel, click the subscribe bell, click the little subscribe button, click the little ding-a-ling-ring bell thing. Yeah, and you'll get notifications about when I post things. Like, in probably 2 hours, my Sherlock Holmes ones from last night will be live. So, live. But anyway, our first story for this wonderful Friday Night Fairy Tales is Graciosa and Percinet. Once upon a time, there lived a king and queen who had one charming daughter. She was so graceful and pretty and clever that everyone called her Graciosa, and the queen was so fond of her that she could think of nothing else. Every day she gave the princess a lovely new frock of gold brocade, and satin or velvet, and when she was hungry she had bowls full of sugar plums, and at least 20 pots of jam. Everybody said she was the happiest princess in the world. Now, there lived at the same court a very rich old duchess, whose name was Grumbly. She was more frightful than tongue can tell. Her hair was red as fire, and she had but one eye, and that was not a pretty one. Her face was as broad as a full moon, and her mouth was so large that everybody who met her would have been afraid they were going to be eaten up. Only she had no teeth. As she was cross as she was ugly, she could not bear to hear everyone saying, "Oh, how pretty and how charming Graciosa was!" So she presently went away from the court to her own castle, which was not far off. But if anybody who went to see her happened to mention the charming princess, she would cry angrily, "It's not true that she is lovely. I have more beauty in my little finger than she has in her whole body." Soon after this, to the great grief of the princess, the queen was taken ill and died. And the king became so melancholy that for a whole year he shut himself up in his palace. At last his physicians, fearing that he would fall ill, ordered that he should go out and amuse himself. So a hunting party was arranged, but it was very hot weather, and the king soon got tired, and said he would dismount and rest at a castle which they were passing. This happened to be the Duchess Grumbly's castle, and when she heard that the king was coming, she went out to meet him, and said that the cellar was the coolest place in the whole castle, if he would consent to come down into it. So down they went together, and the king, seeing about 200 great casks ranged side by side, asked if it was only for herself that she had this immense store of wine. "Yes, sire," answered she, "it is for myself alone, but I shall be most happy to let you taste some of it. Which do you like? Canary, St. Julian, Champagne, Hermitage sack, Raisin, or cider?" "Well," said the king, "since you are so kind to ask me, I prefer champagne to anything else." Then Duchess Grumbly took up a little hammer and tapped upon the cask twice, and out came at least 1,000 crowns. "What's the meaning of this?" she said, smiling. Then she tapped the next cask, and out came a bushel of gold pieces. "I don't understand this at all," said the Duchess, smiling more than before. Then she went to the third cask, tap, tap, and out came such a stream of diamonds and pearls that the ground was covered with them. "Oh," she cried, "this altogether is beyond my comprehension, sire. Someone must have stolen my good wine and put all this rubbish in its place."
"Rubbish, do you call it, Madam Grumbly?" replied the king. "Rubbish? Why, there is enough to buy 10 kingdoms."
Why hasn't she? "Well," she said, "you must know that all these casks are full of gold and jewels, and if you like to marry me, it shall all be yours." Now, the king loved money more than anything else in the world, so he cried joyfully,
"Marry you? Why, with all my heart, tomorrow if you like."
"But I make one condition," said the Duchess. "I must have entire control of your daughter to do as I please with her."
"Oh, certainly, you will have your own way. Let us shake hands upon the bargain," said the king. So they shook hands and went up from the cellar with treasure together. And the Duchess locked the door and gave the key to the king. When he got back to his own palace, Graciosa ran out to meet him and asked if he had had a good sport. "I have caught a dove," answered he.
"Oh, do give it to me," said the princess. "I will keep it and take care of it."
"I can hardly do that," he said, "for, to speak more plainly, I meant that I met the Duchess Grumbly and have promised to marry her."
"And you call her a dove?" asked the princess. "I should have called her a screech owl."
"Hold your tongue," said the king very crossly. "I intend you to behave prettily to her. So now go and make yourself fit to be seen, as I am going to take you to visit her."
So the princess went sorrowfully to her own room, and her nurse, seeing her tears, asked her what was vexing her. "Alas, who would not be vexed," answered she, "for the king intends to marry again, and he has chosen for his new bride my enemy, the hideous Duchess Grumbly." "Oh, well," answered the nurse, "you must remember that you are a princess and are expected to set a good example in making the best of whatever happens. You must promise not to let the Duchess see how much you dislike her." At first the princess would not promise, but the nurse showed her so many good reasons for it that in the end she agreed to be amiable to her stepmother. Then the nurse dressed her in a robe of pale green and gold brocade, and combed out her long fair hair till it floated round her like a golden mantle, and put her head a crown of roses and jasmine with emerald leaves. When she was ready, nobody could have been prettier, but she could still not help looking sad. Meanwhile, the Duchess Grumbly was also occupied in attiring herself. She had one of her shoe heels made an inch or so higher than the other, that she might not limp so much, and put on a cunningly made glass eye in the place of the one that she had lost. She dyed her red hair black and painted her face. Then she put on a gorgeous robe of lilac satin lined with blue, and a yellow petticoat trimmed with violet ribbons. And because she had heard that the queen always rode to their new dominions, she ordered a horse to be made ready for her to ride. While Graciosa was waiting for the king to be ready to be set out, she went down all alone to the garden and to a little wood, where she sat down upon a mossy bank and began to think. And her thoughts were so doleful that very soon she began to cry. And she cried and cried, and forgot all about going back to the palace until she suddenly saw a handsome page standing before her. He was dressed in green, with a cap that he held in his hand was adorned with white plumes. When Graciosa looked at him, he went down on one knee and said to her, "Princess, the king awaits you." The princess was surprised, and, if the truth be told, very much delighted by the appearance of the charming page, whom she could not remember to have been seen before. Thinking he might belong to the household of the Duchess, she said, "How long have you been one of the king's pages?" "I am not in the service of the king, madam," said he, "but in yours." "In mine?" said the princess with great surprise. "And how is it that I've never seen you before?" Princess," he said, "I have never before dared to present myself to you. But now the king's marriage threatens you with so many dangers that I have resolved to tell you at once how much I love you already, and I trust that in time I may win your regard. I am Prince Percinet, whose riches you may have heard, and whose fairy gift will, I hope, be of use to you in your difficulties, if you'll permit me to accompany you under this disguise." "Ah, Percinet!" cried the princess. "Is it really you? I've heard often of you and wish to see you. If you will indeed be my friend, I shall not be afraid of that wicked old Duchess any more." So they went back to the palace together, and there Graciosa found a beautiful horse which Percinet had brought for her to ride. As it was very spirited, he led it by the bridle, and this arrangement entitled him to turn and look at the princess often, which he did not fail to do. Indeed, she was so pretty that it was a real pleasure to look at her. When the horse which the Duchess was to ride appeared beside Graciosa's, it looked no better than an old cart horse. And as to their trappings, there was simply no comparison between the two of them, as the prince's saddle and bridle were one glittering mass of diamonds. The king had so many other things to think of that he did not notice this, but all his courtiers were entirely taken up with admiring the princess and her charming page in green, who was more handsome and distinguished-looking than all the rest of the court put together. When they met the Duchess Grumbly, she was seated in an open carriage, trying in vain to look dignified. The king and the princess saluted her, and her horse was brought forward for her to mount. But when she saw Graciosa's, she cried angrily, "If that child has the better horse than mine, I will go back to my own castle this very minute. What is the good of being a queen if one can be slighted like this?" Upon this, the king commanded Graciosa to dismount and to beg the Duchess to honor her by mounting her horse. The princess obeyed in silence, and the Duchess, without looking at her or thanking her, scrambled up upon the beautiful horse, where she sat looking like a bundle of clothes, and 8 officers had to hold her up for fear that she would fall off. Even then, she was not satisfied, and she was still grumbling and muttering, so they asked her what else was the matter. "I wish the page in green would come and lead the horse, as he did for Graciosa when she rode it," she said sharply. And the king ordered the page to come and lead the queen's horse. Percinet and the princess looked at one another, but never said a word, and then he did as the king commanded. And the procession started with great pomp. The Duchess was greatly elated, and she sat there in a state who would not have wished to change places even with Graciosa. But at the moment when it was least expected, the beautiful horse began to plunge and rear and kick, and finally to run away at such a pace that it was impossible to stop him. At first the Duchess clung to the saddle, but she was very soon thrown off and fell in a heap among the stones and thorns. There they found her, shaken to a jelly, and collected what was left of her as she had been broken a glass. Her bonnet was here, her shoes were there, her face was scratched, and her fine clothes were covered in mud. Excuse me. Never was a bride seen in such a dismal plight. They carried her back to the palace and put her to bed. But as she soon recovered enough to be able to speak, she began to scold and rage and declared that the whole affair was Graciosa's fault, that she had contrived it on purpose to try to get rid of her, and that if the king would not have her punished, she would go back to her castle and enjoy her riches by herself. At this, the king was terribly frightened, for he did not want to lose all those barrels of gold and jewels. So he hastened to appease the Duchess and told her she might punish Graciosa in any way she pleased. Thereupon she sent for Graciosa, who turned pale and trembled at her summons, for she guessed that it promised nothing agreeable for her. She looked about for Percinet, but he was nowhere to be seen, and she had no choice but to go to the Duchess Grumbly's room. She had hardly got inside the door when she was seized by 4 waiting women, who looked so tall and strong and cruel that the princess shuddered at the sight of them, and still more when she saw them arming themselves with great bundles of rods, and heard the Duchess call out to them from her bed to beat the princess without mercy. Poor Graciosa wished miserably that Percinet could only know what was happening and to come to her rescue. But no sooner did they begin to beat her than she found, to her great relief, that all the rods had changed to bundles of peacock feathers. And though the Duchess's women went on till they were so tired that they could no longer raise their arms from their sides, yet she was not hurt in the least. However, the Duchess thought she must be black and blue after such a beating, so Graciosa was released, and pretended to feel very bad, and went away to her own room, where she told her nurse all that had happened. And then the nurse left her, and when the princess turned round, there stood Percinet beside her. She thanked him gratefully for helping her so cleverly, and they laughed and were very merry over the way they had taken the Duchess and her wanting maids. But Percinet advised her still to pretend to be ill for a few days, and after promising to come to her aid whenever she needed him, he disappeared as suddenly as he had come. The Duchess was so delighted at the idea that Graciosa was very ill that she herself recovered twice as fast as she would have done otherwise, and the wedding was held with great magnificence. Now, as the king knew that, above all other things, the queen loved to be told she was beautiful, he ordered her portrait to be painted, and that the tournament should be held, at which all the bravest knights of his court should maintain all comers that Grumbly was the most beautiful princess in the world. Numbers of knights came from far and wide to accept the challenge, and the hideous queen sat in a great state in the balcony hung with cloth of gold and watched the contestants. And Graciosa had to stand up behind her, where her loveliness was so conspicuous that the combatants could not keep their eyes off of her. But the queen was so vain that she thought all the admiring glances were for herself, especially as, in spite of the badness of their cause, the king's knights were so brave that they were the victors in every combat. However, when nearly all the strangers had been defeated, a young unknown knight presented himself. He carried a portrait, enclosed in a bow encrusted with diamonds, and he declared himself willing to maintain against all of them that the queen was the ugliest creature in the world, and that the princess whose portrait he carried was the most beautiful. So, one by one the knights came out against him, and one by one he vanquished them all. And then he opened the box, and said that, to console them, he would show them the portrait of his Queen of Beauty. And when he did so, everyone recognized Princess Graciosa. The unknown knight then saluted her gracefully and retired, without telling his name to anybody. But Graciosa had no difficulty in guessing that it was Percinet. As to the queen, she was so furiously angry that she could hardly speak, but she soon recovered her voice, and overwhelmingly Graciosa was given a torment of reproaches. "What?" she said. "Do you dare to dispute with me for the prize of beauty, and expect me to endure this insult to my knights? But I will not hear it, proud princess. I will have my revenge." "I assure you, madam," said the princess, "that I had nothing to do with it, and am quite willing that you shall be declared Queen of Beauty." "Ah, you are pleased to jest, popinjay," said the queen. "But it will be my turn soon." The king was speedily told what had happened, and how the princess was in terror of the angry queen. But he only said, "The queen must do as she pleases. Graciosa belongs to her." The wicked queen waited impatiently until night fell, and then she ordered her carriage to be brought. Graciosa, much against her will, was forced into it, and away they drove, and never stopped until they reached a great forest, 100 leagues from the palace. This forest was so gloomy and so full of lions and tigers and bears, and wolves, that nobody dared pass through it, even by daylight. And here they set down the unhappy princess in the middle of the black night, and left her in spite of all her tears and entreaties. The princess stood quite still for the first from the sheer bewilderment. But when the last sound of the retreating carriages died away in the distance, she began to run aimlessly hither and thither, sometimes knocking herself against a tree, sometimes tripping over a stone, fearing every minute that she would be eaten up by the lions. Presently she was too tired to advance another step, so she threw herself down upon the ground and cried miserably. "Oh, Percinet, where are you? Have you forgotten me altogether?" She had hardly spoken when all the forest was lighted up with a sudden glow. Every tree seemed to be sending out a soft radiance, which was clearer than moonlight and softer than daylight. And at the end of the long avenue of trees opposite her, the princess saw a palace of clear crystal, which blazed like the sun. At that moment, a slight sound behind her made her start, and there stood Percinet himself. "Did I frighten you, my princess?" said he. "I come to bid you welcome to our fairy palace, in the name of the queen, my mother, who is prepared to love you as much as I do." The princess joyfully mounted with him into a little sled drawn by 2 stags, which bounded off and drew them swiftly to the wonderful palace, where the queen received her with great kindness, and a splendid banquet was served at once. Graciosa was so happy to have found Percinet, and to have escaped from the gloomy forest and all its terrors, that she was very hungry and very merry, and they had a gay party. After supper they went into another lovely room, where the crystal walls were covered with pictures, and the princess saw with great surprise that her own history was represented in them, even down to the moment where Percinet found her in the forest. "Your painters must be indeed diligent," she said, pointing out the last picture to the prince. "They're obliged to me, for I will not have anything forgotten that happens to you," he answers. When the princess grew sleepy, 24 charming maidens put her to bed in the prettiest room she had ever seen, and then sang to her so sweetly that Graciosa's dreams were all of mermaids, cool sea waves and caverns, in which she wandered with Percinet. But when she woke up again, her first thought was that, delightful as this fairy palace seemed to her, yet she could not stay in it, but must go back to her father. When she had been dressed by the 24 maidens in a charming robe which the queen had sent for her, in which she looked prettier than ever, Prince Percinet came to see her, and was bitterly disappointed when she told him that he had been thinking. He begged her to consider again how unhappy the wicked queen would make her, and how, if she would but marry him, all the fairy palace would be hers, and his one thought would be to please her. But, in spite of everything he could say, the princess was quite determined to go back, though he at last persuaded her to stay 8 days, which were so full of pleasure and amusement that they passed like a few hours. On the last day, Graciosa, who had often felt anxious to know what was going on in her father's palace, said to Percinet that she was unsure that he could find out for her. If he would but reason with the queen had given her father for her sudden disappearance. Percinet at first offered to send his courier to find out, but the princess said, "Oh, isn't there a quicker way of knowing than that?" "Very well," said Percinet. "You shall see for yourself." So they went up together to the top of the very high tower, which, like the rest of the castle, was built entirely of rock crystal. There the prince held Graciosa's hand in his, and made her put the tip of her little finger into her mouth, and looked towards the town. And immediately she saw the wicked queen go to the king, and heard her say to him, "That miserable princess is dead, and no great loss either. I have ordered that she shall be buried at once." And then the princess saw how she dressed up a log of wood, and had it buried, and how the old king cried, and all the people murmured that the queen had killed Graciosa with her cruelties, and that she ought to have her head cut off. When the princess saw the king was so sorry for her pretended death that he could neither eat nor drink, she cried, "Ah, Percinet, take me back quickly if you love me." And so, though he did not want to go at all, he was obliged to promise that he would let her go. "You may not regret me, princess," he said sadly, "for I fear that you do not love me well enough. But I foresee that you will more than once regret that you left this fairy palace where we have been so happy." But, in spite of all he could say, she bade farewell to the queen, his mother, and prepared to set out. So Percinet, very unwillingly, brought the little sledge with the stags, and she mounted beside him. Then they had hardly gone 20 yards when a tremendous noise behind her made Graciosa look back, and she saw the palace of crystal fly into a million splinters, like a spray of a fountain, and vanish. "Oh, Percinet," she cried, "what has happened? The palace is gone." "Yes," he answered, "my palace is a thing of the past. You will see it again, but not until you have been buried.
Now you are angry with me, said Graciosa in her most coaxing voice. Though after all, I am more to be pitied than you are.
When they got near the palace, the prince made the sledge and themselves invisible, so the princess got in unobserved, and ran up to the great hall where the king was sitting all by himself. At first, he was very much startled by Graciosa's sudden appearance, but she told him how the queen had left her out in the forest, and how she had caused a log of wood to be buried. The king, who did not know what to think, sent quickly and had it dug up. And, sure enough, it was as the princess had said. Then he caressed Graciosa and made her sit down to supper with him, and they were as happy as possible. But someone had by this time told the wicked queen that Graciosa had come back, and was at supper with the king, and she flew into a terrible fury. The poor old king quite trembled before her, and when she declared that Graciosa was not a princess at all, but a wicked impostor, well, that if the king did not give her up at once, she would go back to her own castle and never see him again. He had not a word to say, and really seemed to believe that it was not Graciosa after all. So the queen in great triumph sent for her waiting women, who dragged the unhappy princess away and shut her up in the garret. They took away all her jewels and her pretty dress, and left her a rough cotton frock, wooden shoes, and a little cloth cap. There was some straw in the corner, which was all she had for a bed, and they gave her a very little bit of black bread to eat. In this miserable plight, Graciosa did indeed regret the fairy palace, and she would have called Percinet to aid her, only she felt sure he was still vexed with her for leaving him, and though she did not expect him to come. Meanwhile, the queen had sent for an old fairy, as malicious as herself, and said to her,
You must find me some task for this fine princess which I cannot possibly do, for I mean to punish her. And if she does not do what I order, she will not be able to say that I am unjust.
So the old fairy said she would think it over and come again the next day. When she returned, she brought with her a skein of thread, 3 times as big as herself. It was so fine that a breath of air could break it, and so tangled that it was impossible to see the beginning or the end of it. The queen sent to Graciosa and said to her,
Do you see this skein? Set your clumsy fingers to work upon it, for I must have it disentangled by sunset. And if you break a single thread of it, it will be far the worse for you.
So saying this, left her, locking the door behind her with 3 keys. The princess stood dismayed at the sight of the terrible skein. If she did but turn it over to see where it began, she broke 1,000 threads, and not one could she disentangle. At last she threw it in the middle of the floor, crying,
Oh, Percinet, this fatal skein will be the death of me if you will not forgive me and help me at once.
And immediately in came Percinet, as easily as if he had been and had all the keys in his possession. "I am here, princess, as much as ever at your service," he said, "though you really are not very kind to me." Then he just stroked the skein with his wand, and all the broken threads joined themselves together, and the whole skein wound itself smoothly off in the most surprising manner. And the prince, turning to Graciosa, asked if there was nothing else that she wished him to do for her, and if the time would never come when she would wish for him for his own sake.
Don't be vexed with me, Percinet, she said. I'm unhappy enough without that.
"But why should you be unhappy, my princess?" he cried. "Only come with me, and we shall be happy as long as a day together." "But suppose you get tired of me," said Graciosa. The prince was so grieved at this want of confidence that he left her without another word. The wicked queen was in such a hurry to punish Graciosa that she thought the sun would never set. And indeed it was before the appointed time when she came with her 4 fairies. And she fitted 3 keys in the locks and said,
"I'll venture to say that the idle minx has not done anything at all. She prefers to sit with her hands before her and keep them white."
But as soon as she answered, Graciosa presented her with the ball of thread in perfect order, so that she had no fault to find, and could only pretend to discover that it was soiled, for which imaginary fault she gave Graciosa a blow on each cheek. That made her white and pink turn green and yellow. And then she sent her back to be locked into the garret once more. Then the queen sent for the fairy again and scolded her furiously as well.
"Don't make such a mistake again. Find me something that will be quite impossible for her to do,"
said she. So the next day the fairy appeared with a huge barrel of feathers from all sorts of birds. There were nightingales, canaries, goldfinches, linnets, tomits, parrots, owls, sparrows, doves, ostriches, bustards, peacocks, larks, partridges, and, anything else you can think of. These feathers were all mixed up in such confusion that the birds themselves could not have chosen out their own.
"Here," said the fairy, "is a little task which will take your prisoner's skills and patience to accomplish. Tell her to pick out and lay in a separate heap the feathers of each bird. She should need to be a fairy to do it all."
The queen was more delighted at the thought of the despair the task would cause the princess. So she sent for her, and with the same threats as before, locked her up with the 3 keys, ordering that all the feathers should be sorted by sunset. Graciosa set to work at once, but before she had taken out a dozen feathers, she found that it was perfectly impossible to know one from the other.
"Oh, well," she cried, "the queen wishes to kill me, and if I must die, I must. I cannot ask Percinet to help me again, for if he really loved me, he would not wait till I called him. He would come without that."
"I'm here, my Graciosa," cried Percinet, springing out of the barrel where he had been hiding. "How can you still doubt that I love you with all my heart?" Then he gave 3 strokes of his wand upon the barrel, and all the feathers flew out in a cloud and settled in neat little separate heaps all around the room.
"What should I do without you, Percinet?"
said Graciosa gratefully. But she could still not quite make up her mind to go with him and leave her father's kingdom forever. So she begged him to give her more time to think of it, and he had to go away, disappointed once more. Damn girl. When the wicked queen came at sunset, she was amazed and infuriated to find the task done. However, she complained that the heaps of feathers were badly arranged, and for that the princess was beaten and sent back to her garret. Then the queen sent for the fairy once more and scolded her until she was fairly terrified, and promised to go home and think of another task for Graciosa, worse than either of the others. Maybe. At the end of 3 days she came again, bringing with her a box.
"Tell your slave," she said, "to carry this wherever you please, but on no account to open it. She will not be able to help doing so, and then you will be quite satisfied with the result.
So the queen came to Graciosa and said,
Carry this box to my castle and place it on the table in my own room. But I forbid you on pain of death to look at what it contains.
Well, Graciosa set out, wearing her little cap and wooden shoes and old cotton frock. But even in this disguise, she was so beautiful that all the passers-by wondered who she was. She had not gone far before the heat of the sun and the weight of the little box tired her so much that she sat down to rest in the shade of a little wood which lay on one side of a green meadow. She was carefully holding the box upon her lap when suddenly she felt great desire to open it.
What could possibly happen if I did? She said to herself. I should not take anything out. I should only just see what there is.
And without further hesitation, she lifted the cover. Instantly came out swarms of little men and women, no taller than her finger, and scattered themselves all over the meadow, singing and dancing and playing the merriest games, so that at first Graciosa was delighted and watched them with much amusement. But presently, when she was rested and she wished to go on her way, she found that, do what she would, she could not get them back into the box. If she chased them in the meadow, they fled to the wood. If she pursued them to the wood, they dodged around trees and behind sprigs of moss, and with peals of elven laughter scampered back into the meadow. At last, weary and terrified, she sat down and cried.
It is my own fault, she said sadly. Percinet, if you still care for me and such an impudent princess, do come and help me once more.
Immediately, Percinet stood before her. Ah, princess, he said, but for the wicked queen I fear you would never think of me at all.
Indeed I should, said Graciosa. I am not so ungrateful as you think. Only wait till I dawn, I believe I shall love you quite dearly.
Percinet was pleased at this, and with one stroke of his wand compelled all the willful little people to come back to their places in the box. And then, rendering the princess invisible, took her with him in his chariot to the castle. When the princess presented herself at the door and said that the queen had ordered her to place the box in her own room, the governor laughed heartily at the idea. No, no, my little shepherdess, he said. This is not the place for you. No wooden shoes have ever been over that floor yet. Then Graciosa begged him to give her a written message telling the queen that he had refused to admit her. This he did, and she went back to Percinet, who was waiting for her, and they set out together for the palace. You may imagine that they did not go the shortest way, but the princess did not find it too long, and before they parted she had promised that if the queen was still cruel to her and tried again to play any spiteful trick, she would leave her and come to Percinet forever. When the queen saw her returning, she fell upon the fairy, whom she had kept with her this time, and pulled her hair and scratched her face, and would really have killed her if a fairy, could be killed. When the princess presented the letter and the box, she threw them both upon the fire without opening them. It looked very much as if she would like to throw the princess after them. However, what she really did do was to have a great hole as deep as a well and dug in her garden. On the top of it, covered with a flat stone. Then she went and walked near it, and said to Graciosa and all her ladies who were with her,
I am told a great treasure lies beneath the stone. Let us see if we can lift it.
So they all began to push and pull at it, and Graciosa among the others, which was just what the queen wanted. For as soon as the stone was lifted high enough, she gave the princess a push which sent her down to the bottom of the well. And then the stone was let fall again, and there she was, a prisoner. Graciosa felt now she was indeed hopelessly lost. Surely not even Percinet could find her in the heart of the earth.
"This is like being burned alive," she said with a shudder. "Oh, Percinet, if you only knew how I was suffering for my want of trust in you. But how could I be sure that you would not be like the other men and tire of me in the moment you were sure I loved you?"
Princesses. As she spoke, she suddenly saw a little door open, and the sunshine blazed into the dismal well. Graciosa did not hesitate an instant, but passed through into a charming garden. The flowers and fruit grew on every side, fountains plashed, and birds sang in the branches overhead. And when she reached a great avenue of trees and looked up to see where it would lead her, she found herself close to the Palace of Crystal. Yeah, there was no mistaking it, and the Queen and Percinet were coming to greet her.
"Oh, Princess," said the Queen, "don't keep this poor Percinet in suspense any longer. You little guess his anxiety he has suffered while you were in the power of the miserable Queen."
The princess kissed her gratefully and promised to do as she wished in everything, and holding her hand out to Percinet with a smile, and said,
"Do you remember telling me that I should not see your powers again until I had been buried? I wonder if you guessed that then, when that happened, I should tell you that I love you with all my heart and will marry you whenever you like."
Prince Percinet joyfully took the hand that was given him, and, for fear the princess would change her mind, the wedding was held at once, with the greatest splendor. And Graciosa and Percinet lived happily ever after. Hey, Papa Penguin. And yes, I do think I have the brain cell tonight. So, you might tell Oni that, Blink. Oh. For some reason, my auto shadows are not working, which is kind of a pain in the butt. Of course, I haven't been to the Phosabot site in a while. So, how was Rust of Baldur's Gate? Well, how much you played on it? Perils and Princesses. Oh, that does sound like it would be interesting. I may have to look into that one. Do that real quick. Okay. Oh, you can get the PDFs. Nice. Well, that's where the powers come from, after all. Well, have a good night's sleep, and hope you have some good dreams. Oh, now it goes. Damn, Fussabot, what's going on? What? Oh, nice to know if Fussabot's waking up. Yes, I still have you listed as Swinburne. Okay, the Fussbot interface has changed. That's why it wasn't working. Okay, well, it's working now. I wanted to make sure my auto shoutouts were working. It just kind of made me wonder why it wasn't popping up. Anyway, that was Graciosa and Percinet. Yeah. I know I've read that one before. But I got the page for Perils and Princesses up so I can look at it. Ooh. Resolve, grace, wits. Oh, nice. Skill levels. Character classes. Nice. Princess is a gender neutral term. Okay, that is cool. I will definitely have to look into that more. Let's see. What is my next story? Anyway, hope you have a good night. Let's see. Three Princesses of Whiteland. Okay, this is how many pages? From 191 to... Okay, it's... Nope. 192... Okay, it's not as long as I thought I was skipping pages. Okay. A Guilty, post something real quick. Dong. Not what I was expecting. Huh, auto shoutout didn't kick it though. Do I have an auto shoutout? I was pretty sure I had one set up for you. Keywords. Yeah, it should be there. Huh. I wonder why it's not pulling it up. Unless it's already done it. Which I guess is possible. I have to look at the log. Oh, that's weird. So this is turned on. Okay. I don't know how to follow a cold virgin princess. Go figure. Does command work? Okay, now what's what does it? There you go. And it did it twice. That's crazy. Okay, back to stories. Ouch. Actually, stretch first. Oh! Okay. Do the stretch and the hydrate and the stretch. There we go, back to the stories, because that is what we do. We are doing Friday Night Fairy Tales. And our second story, because the first one was really long, is the three... Okay. Alright. Enjoy work, if possible. Because I know that is. Next story is The Three Princesses of Whiteland. Okay. There was once upon a time a fisherman who lived hard by a palace and fished for the king's table. One day when he was out fishing, he caught nothing at all. Let him do what he might with his rod and line, there was never even so much as a sprat on his hook. But when the day was well nigh over, a head rose up out of the water and said, "If you'll give me what your wife shows you when you go home, you shall catch fish enough." So said the man, "Yes, in a moment." And then he caught fish in plenty. But when he got home at night, and his wife showed him a baby which had just been born, he fell a weeping and wailing when he told her of the promise which he had given. He was very unhappy. As soon as all this was soon told to the king up at the palace, and when he heard what sorrow the woman was in, and the reason for it, he said that he himself would take the child and see if he could not save it. The baby was a boy, and the king took him at once and brought him up as his own son until the lad grew up. But then one day he begged to have leave go with his father to the fish. He had a strong desire to do this, and he said, the king was very unwilling to permit it, but at last the lad got leave. He stayed with his father, and all went prosperously and well with them the whole day, until they came back to land in the evening. Then the lad found that he had lost his pocket handkerchief, and would go out into the boat after it. But no sooner had he got into the boat than it began to move off with him, so quickly that the water foamed all around about, and all that the lad did to keep the boat back with the oars was done to no purpose, for it went on and on the whole night through, And at last he came to a white strand that lay far, far away. There he landed, and when he had walked on for some distance, he met an old man with a long white beard. "What is the name of this country?" said the youth.
"Whiteland,"
answered the man, and then he begged the youth to tell him whence he came and what he was going to do. And so the youth did so.
"Well, then,"
said the man,
if you walk on further along the seashore here, you will come to 3 princesses who are standing in the earth, so that their heads alone are out of it. The first one of all of them will call you. She is the eldest, and she will beg you very prettily to come to her and help her. The second will do the same, but you must go near either of them. Hurry past if you neither saw nor heard them. But you shall go to the third and do what she bids you. It will bring you good fortune."
When the youth came to the first princess, she called to him and begged him to come to her very prettily. But he walked on as if he had not even seen her. And he passed by the second the same way. But when he came to the third, "If thou wilt do what I tell thee, thou shalt choose among us 3, said the princess. So the lad said he was most willing. And she told him that 3 trolls had planted 3 of them in the earth, but that formerly they had dwelt in the castle which he could see some distance in the woods. "Now," she said, "thou shalt go into the castle and let the trolls beat thee one night for each of us. And if thou canst endure that, thou wilt set us free." "Yes," answered the lad, "I will certainly try to do so." "When thou goest in," continued the princess, 2 lions will stand by the doorway, but if thou only go straight between, they will give to thee no harm. Go straight forward into a dark chamber. There you shalt lie down. When the troll will come and beat thee, thou shalt take the flask which is hanging on the wall, and anoint thyself wheresoever thou hast wounded thee. After which thou shalt be well as before. Then lay hold of the sword which is hanging by the side of the flask, and smite the troll dead." So he did what the princess had told him. He walked straight in between the lions, just as if he had not seen them, then into the small chamber, and then lie down on the bed. The first night a troll came in with 3 heads and 3 rods, and beat the lad most unmercifully. But he held out until the troll was done with him. Then he took the flask and rubbed himself. Having done this, he grasped the sword and smote the troll's head. In the morning, when he went to the seashore, the princesses were out of the earth as far as their waists. The next night, everything happened the same way, but the troll who came in had 6 heads and 6 rods, and beat him much more severely than the first had done. But when the lad went out of doors the next morning, the princesses were out of the earth as far as their knees. On the 3rd night, a troll came that had 9 heads and 9 rods. And he struck the lad and flogged him so long that at last he swooned away. So the troll took him up and flung him against the wall. And this made the flask of ointment fall down and splashed all over him, and he became as strong as ever again. Then, without loss of time, he grasped the sword and struck the troll dead. And in the morning he went out of the castle, and the princesses were standing there entirely out of the earth. So he took the youngest for his queen, and lived happily very long with her. At last, however, he took a fancy to go home for a short time to see his parents. His queen, she did not like it, but when his longing grew so great that he told her he must go, she said to him, "One thing shalt thou promise me, and that is to do what thy father bids thee, but not what thy mother bids thee." And this he promised. So she gave him a ring, which enabled him who wore it to obtain 2 wishes. He wished himself at home, and instantly found himself there. But his parents were so amazed at the splendor of his apparel that their wonder never ceased. When he had been home for a few days, his mother wanted him to go up to the palace and show the king what a great man he had become. The father said, "No, you must not do that, for if he does, we shall have no more delight in him in this time." But he spoke in vain, for the mother begged and prayed until at last he went. When he arrived there, he was more splendid, both raiment and all else, than the other king, who did not like it, and said, "Well, you can see what kind of queen mine is, but I can't see yours. I do not believe you have such a pretty queen as I have." "Would to heaven she were standing here, and then you would be able to see," said the young king. And in an instant she was standing there. But she was very sorrowful, and said to him, "Why dost thou not remember my words, and listen only to what thy father said? Now I must go home at once, and thou hast wasted both thy wishes." Then she tied a ring in his hair, and which had her name put upon it, and wished herself at home again. And now the young king was deeply afflicted, and day out and day in went on thinking not of what else but how to get back to his queen again. "I'll try to see if there is any other place where I can learn how to find Whiteland," he thought, and journeyed forth out into the world. When he had gone some distance, he came to a mountain, where he met a man who was the lord over all the beasts of the forest. For they all came to him when he blew his horn which he had. So the king asked where Whiteland was.
"I do not know that," he answered, "but I will ask my beasts."
Then he blew his horn and inquired whether any of them knew where Whiteland lay, but there was not one who knew. So he gave him a pair of snowshoes.
"When you have these on," he said, "you will come to my brother, who lives hundreds of miles from here. He is lord over all the birds of the air. Ask him. When you have got there, just turn the shoes so that the toes point this way, and they will come home again of their own accord."
When the king arrived there, he turned the shoes as the lord of the beasts had bidden him, and they went back. And now he once more asked about Whiteland. And the king summoned all the birds together, and inquired if any of them knew where Whiteland lay. No, none of them knew. Long after the others came an old eagle. He had been absent 10 whole years, but he too knew no more than the rest. "Well, well," said the man, "then you shall have a loan of pair of snowshoes of mine. If you will wear them, you will get to my brother, who lives hundreds of miles from here. He is the lord of all the fish of the sea. You can ask him. But do not forget to turn the shoes around." The king thanked him and put on the shoes, and when he had got to him, who was the lord of all the fishes, he turned the snowshoes round, and back they went, just as the others had gone. And he asked once more where Whiteland was. The man called all the fish together with his horn, but none of them knew anything about it. At last came an old pike, which had great difficulty in bringing home to him. When he asked the pike, he said, "Yes, Whiteland is known to me. I have been cook there these 10 years. Tomorrow morning I have to go back there, for now the queen, whose king is staying away, is to marry someone else." "If that be the case, I give you a piece of advice," said the man. "Not far from here there is a moor stand 3 brothers, who have stood there 100 years fighting for a hat, a cloak, and a pair of boots. If anyone now has these, they can make themselves invisible, and if he desires to go any place, he has but to wish, and he is there. You may tell them that you have a desire to try these things, but then you will be able to decide which of the men will have them." So the king thanked him and went, and did what he said. "What is this you're standing fighting for over and over?" he said to the brothers. "Let me make a trial of these things, and then I will judge between you." They willingly consented to this, but when he had got the hat, the cloak, and the boots, he said, "Next time we meet, you shall have my decision." And thereupon he wished himself away. While he was going quickly through the air, he fell in with the north wind. "Where are you going?" said the north wind. "To Whiteland," said the king, and then he related what had happened to him. "Well," said the north wind, "you can easily get there a little quicker than I can, for I have to puff and blow into every corner. But when you get there, place yourself on the stairs by the side of the door. Then I will come blustering in as if I wanted to blow down the whole castle. And when the prince who is to have your queen comes to see what is astir, just take him by the throat and fling him out. Then I will carry him away from the courts." As the north wind had said, so did the king. He stood on the stairs, and when the north wind came howling and roaring, and caught the roof of the walls of the castle until they shook, the prince went out to see what was the matter. As soon as he came out, the king took him by the neck and flung him out, and the north wind laid hold of him and carried him off. And when he was rid of him, the king went into the castle. At first the queen did not know him, because he had grown so thin and pale from having traveled so long and sorrowfully. But when she saw her ring, she was heartily glad. And then the rightful wedding was held, and held in such a way that it was talked about far and wide. Yeet! You're right. Thank you for the stretch and hydrate. Let's see if my ear switches work. Oh, they're there. Oh, yeah, right there. Good spot. Good spot. A little further over. Oh, right. Oh, in there. Oh, fell over. I went too far. I've got to figure out what way to keep that spring sound on my microphone stand, because it's not going to do it now. Oh well. But yeah, only I had to borrow the brain cell because I was reading. Wow, that is loud. Okay, that was interesting. I unmuted your stream long enough to hear someone say harmonica up their ass. Wow, okay. Good night, everybody. Okay, why did your auto shout out not work? What the hell? What's the bot? I know I have one. Where is it? No. Where is it? I can't remember what I nicknamed it. That's the bad part. Oh, never mind. There it is. Oh, wait. I need to... I think I had the wrong space in it. Where's it? Oh, because that... Yeah, never mind. I know what I did wrong. Still had the... I hadn't fixed the word to release it yet. Nope, back on there. Come on, phrases. There we go. That should work. Maybe. Will it work this time? Oh, what's about you fail? It did not save. Oh, crap. Okay, now maybe it'll work. There it goes. What the hell? Okay, it needs fixing. I will have to fix that later. I'm not sure where I need to fix it. I think it's one of the ones that have to fix the stream elements. Because command needs to change. Is there actually an I choose you? That makes me wonder. Is there? Oh god, that channel actually... Oh, maybe? That channel actually exists. That's craziness. Oh, we'll have to fix that later. Anyway. Let's see. I might have time for one more story. How long is this next one? Ooh, well, this is going to be a fun one to read. How long is this one? I get the feeling it's going to be... Oh, it's only 4 pages. Really? It's only 4 pages? Yeah, I'm reading this one. Okay. Romance. Oh, I did leave it as one word. That's why I did it that way. Okay. And I want to make sure this works, because I will forget to do it later. Oh, come on. Ah, that's not good. Oh well. Do it this way. Yes. Come on, do the Oni post. Okay, there it is. Okay, we've got 20 minutes. I can get through this next story, no problem. So, possibly the last story for the night, unless I get enough energy to do another one. The Voice of Death. Once upon a time there lived a man whose one wish and prayer was to get rich. Day and night he thought of nothing else, and at last his prayers were granted, and he became very wealthy. Now, being so rich and having so much to lose, he felt that it would be a terrible thing to die and leave all his possessions behind. So he made up his mind to set out in search of a land where there was no death. He got ready for his journey, took leave of his wife, and started. Wherever he came to a new country, the first question that he asked was whether people died in that land. And when he heard that they did, he set out again on his quest. At last he reached the county where he was told that people did not know the meaning of the word death. Our traveler was delighted when he heard this, and said, "But surely there are great numbers of people in your land, if no one ever dies." "No," they replied. "There are not great numbers, for you see, from time to time, a voice is heard calling first one and then another, and whoever hears that voice gets up and goes away, and never comes back." "And do they see the person who calls them?" he said, "or do they only hear his voice?" "They both see and hear him," was the answer. Well, the man was amazed when he heard that people were stupid enough to follow the voice, and though they knew that if they went when it called, they would never return. And he went back to his own home and got all his possessions together. And taking his wife and family, he set out, resolved to go live in that country where the people did not die, but where instead they heard a voice calling them, which they followed into a land from which they never returned. For he had made up his own mind that when he or any of his family heard that voice, they would pay no heed, however loudly it called. After he settled down his new home and had got everything in order about him, he warned his wife and family that, unless they wanted to die, they must on no account listen to a voice which they might some day hear calling for them. For some years everything went well with them, and they lived happily in their new home. But one day, while they were all sitting together around the table, his wife suddenly started up, exclaiming in a loud voice,
I'm coming! I'm coming!
And she began to look around the room for her fur coat. But her husband jumped up, and taking a firm hold of her by the hand, held her fast, and reproached her, saying, "Don't you remember what I told you? Stay where you are unless you wish to die."
"But don't you hear the voice calling me?" she answered. "I am merely going to see why I am wanted. I shall come back shortly."
And so she fought and struggled to get away from her husband, and to go where the voice summoned. But he would not let her go, and had all the doors of the house shut and bolted. When she saw that he had done this, she said,
"Very well, dear husband, I shall do what you wish, and remain where I am."
So her husband believed that all was right, and that she had thought better of it, and had got over her mad impulse to obey the voice. But a few minutes later she made a sudden dash for one of the doors, opened it, and darted out, followed by her husband. He caught her by the fur coat, and begged and implored her not to go, for if she did, she would certainly never return. She said nothing but to let her arms fall backwards, and suddenly bending herself forward, she slipped out of the coat, leaving it in her husband's hands. He, poor man, seemed turned to stone as he gazed after her hurrying away from him, and calling at the top of her voice as she ran,
"I am coming! I am coming!"
When she was quite out of sight, her husband recovered his wits and went back into his house, murmuring, "If she is so foolish as to wish to die, I can't help it. I warned and implored her to pay no heed to that voice, however loudly it might call." Well, days and weeks and months and years passed, and nothing happened to disturb the peace of the household. But one day the man was at the barber's as usual, being shaved. The shop was full of people, and his chin had just been covered with a lather of soap, when suddenly starting up from the chair, he called out in a loud voice, "I won't come, do you hear? I won't come!" The barber and the other people in the shop listened to him in amazement, but again looked towards the doors. He exclaimed, "I tell you, once and for all, I do not mean to come, so go away." A few moments later, he called out again, "Go away, I tell you, or it'll be the worse for you. You may call as much as you like, but you will never get me to come." And he got so angry that you might have thought that someone was actually standing at the door, tormenting him. At last he jumped up and caught the razor out of the barber's hand, exclaiming, "Give me that razor, and I'll teach him to let people alone in the future." And he rushed out of the house as if he were running after someone.